The baby was 5 days old when they took him. Amara Osei did not know this was happening. She was under sedation in the room next door, recovering from a post-delivery procedure, while her son, 4 kilograms, full head of dark curly hair, the most perfect and terrifying thing she had ever produced, was lifted from his bassinet by a woman in a gray coat who moved through the private clinic in Incheon with the quiet authority of someone who had arranged everything in advance and was now simply collecting what was already hers. Amara woke up 4 hours later. The bassinet was empty. The nurse who came when she pressed the call button could not meet her eyes. The woman in the gray coat was already on a flight back to Seoul. That was 5 years ago. This morning, Amara stood in the elevator of a 30-floor residential tower in the Itaewon district of Seoul, watching the numbers climb, and she breathed the way she had taught herself to breathe across 5 years of surviving, steadily from the bottom of the chest, no sound, no visible effort. Her reflection in the elevator's brushed steel doors showed her exactly what she needed it to show. A composed, professional woman in her early 30s, natural hair pinned back, chef's portfolio bag over one shoulder. Calm, unremarkable, someone with nothing to hide. The elevator opened to the 28th floor. She had 3 seconds before the door to the apartment opened. She used them. Then the door opened and Kim Jawan was standing in front of her. And he was colder than she had expected, and the apartment behind him smelled of coffee and morning light. And somewhere down the hallway, a small voice was demanding to know who was at the door, and Amara did not allow a single thing to move in her face. "Damn ease," she said. "I have an interview at 9. Jawan looked at her the way she had learned. He looked at everything, from the outside in cataloging, assigning value, deciding the outcome before the conversation had properly started. He was tall, the kind of tall that was mostly composed of stillness rather than height, and he wore a charcoal suit at 8:50 in the morning in his own home, with the complete lack of self-consciousness of a man who did not distinguish between his professional life and his personal one because he had long ago absorbed one into the other. "Come in," he said. That was all. The kitchen was the kind of kitchen that existed to be photographed for architecture magazines. All clean lines and pale stone and windows that gave the full Han River in the distance. Jawan sat at the counter, and Amara stood across from him, and he asked her 3 questions that were designed in the interview before it started. He told her the previous chef had lasted 6 weeks. He told her his son had specific preferences that were non-negotiable in a routine that was not to be disrupted. He said all of this in a flat, efficient tone that made very clear he was not interested in her response, only in whether she would be diminished by the delivery. She was not. "What does he actually like to eat?" she asked. "Not what the nutritionist says. What does he ask for?" Jaewon looked at her, something behind his eyes recalculated by a small degree. "Jollof rice," he said, "with the crust at the bottom. Soft-boiled eggs, cut in quarters, not halves. He will not eat anything orange." "Any orange? But just the color?" "Just the color. He's fine with orange juice if it's in a blue cup." Amara held this information without expression. "I can work with that," she said. Jaewon looked at her for another moment. Then he said, "Start Monday," and picked up his documents, and that was the interview. She was almost at the front door when she heard it. Small feet on wood floor. Then a voice, 5 years old, precise, carrying the specific gravity of a child who had opinions about everything and had never been told those opinions were small. "Appa, who was that?" "New chef," Jaewon said without looking up. A pause. "Will she stay?" Another pause. "We'll see," Jaewon said. Amara stepped into the elevator and pressed lobby and stood very still as the doors closed and the floor dropped away beneath her, and she allowed herself exactly 4 seconds to press her back against the elevator wall and close her eyes and breathe in a way that was not steady and not professional and not composed. 4 seconds. Then she straightened. The elevator reached the lobby. She walked out into the Seoul morning. She had found her son. Monday arrived, and Amara came with it. And the first week of working in Kim Jae-won's kitchen was a sustained exercise in controlled endurance. He was not cruel. Cruelty would have been easier. He was precise in a way that felt personal even when it wasn't, the kind of man who returned a plate to the kitchen because the temperature was 2 degrees off optimal, who left a single written note, just the word temperature, and considered this sufficient communication. He was in the apartment in the mornings and the evenings and occasionally at unpredictable hours in the middle of the day, and every time he moved through the kitchen, he generated a specific kind of pressure, the pressure of a man whose standards were architectural and whose tolerance for variance was essentially zero. Amara adjusted. She was better on Wednesday than Monday, better on Friday than Wednesday. This was not performance. It was survival instinct redirected into culinary precision, and it served her well. Taeyong appeared in the kitchen doorway on Thursday afternoon. He stood there in his school uniform, navy and white, one sock pulled higher than the other, school bag still on his back, watching her prep the evening meal with the unblinking focused attention of a small scientist observing a new compound. She did not make a performance of noticing him. She kept her hands moving on the cutting board. "There's a stool behind you if you want to sit," she said. He looked at the stool. He looked at her. He sat. He said nothing for 22 minutes. Amara counted. Then, right as she was plating, he said, "It smells like something I know, but I don't know what." She set the plate down carefully. She turned and looked at her son for the first time face to face, without a counter between them, without professional distance to hide inside, and what she saw nearly destroyed 4 years of careful preparation. He had her mouth. He had her grandmother's nose. He had Jawan's eyes, the exact dark, measuring quality of them. And the combination was so specifically and completely Taeyong, so entirely his own person, that she felt something in her chest crack open along a fault line she had not known was still there. "You'll remember it eventually," she said. "Things like that come back." He looked at her with those eyes that were Jawan's and completely his own at the same time. Then he nodded, slid off the stool, and disappeared back down the hallway. Amara stood at the counter for a while. Then she went back to plating because the alternative was not an option. The first real collision between Amara and Jawan happened on a Tuesday evening in the 3rd week. She was still in the kitchen at 8:30, working through the following morning's prep, when he came home from whatever the evening had required of him and found the kitchen lights on and a woman who was technically off duty still at his counter. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at her. "Your hours end at 7, he said. "The prep takes as long as it takes," she said, not turning around. "I don't leave a kitchen half finished. You're not being paid past 7. I am aware." She turned. "I'll be done in 20 minutes. He looked at her with an expression that was trying very hard to be the same one he used for everything, and was not quite succeeding. "I'm not asking for your dedication, Ms. Ease. I'm telling you the schedule exists for a reason." "What reason?" He blinked. "Excuse me. What reason does the schedule exist for?" "Because if it's to protect your time, I'm not bothering your time. I'm in the kitchen. If it's to protect mine, I'm making the choice to be here. So I'm asking what reason it actually serves to have me leave prep unfinished." The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Outside, Seoul hummed its permanent evening frequency through the windows. "That is not the point," Jawan said. "What is the point?" He looked at her. She looked back at him. The space between them on opposite sides of the counter was 6 feet, and somehow much less than that. He went to the cabinet. He took out 2 glasses. He filled both with water and set one on the counter near her side without comment. Then he walked to his study and closed the door. Amara looked at the glass of water for a long moment. Then she finished the prep, drank the water, and went home. She did not examine what the water meant. She could not afford to yet. Kim Sori arrived on a Thursday and moved through the penthouse like someone who considered it partly hers, which in her mind she did. She was 3 years younger than Jawan and looked like she had been assembled by someone who understood power as an aesthetic, impeccable, controlled, the kind of beautiful that was also a statement. She greeted Taeyong with genuine warmth, which was the most important thing to understand about Sori. She genuinely loved her nephew. She had told herself this was why she had done what she did 5 years ago. She had mostly convinced herself it was true. She found her way to the kitchen at the end of the evening on the pretext of complimenting the food. The food was exceptional and the compliment was real. What came after was not. "You train where?" Sori asked, leaning against the counter in a way that looked casual and was not. "Cape Coast Institute. Then 2 years at a private establishment in Abuja. And before Seoul, you were based in Accra mostly, sometime in London." Amara moved the dishes with the focused efficiency of someone not giving this conversation more attention than it required. "You have a slight accent. That's interesting. Which part of Nigeria?" "Lagos, originally. My family moved around." Sori smiled. It was a very good smile. The food was remarkable. Taeyong ate everything, which I'm told is unprecedented. She paused. "How did you know he'd eat the jollof that way? With the crust?" "I asked Mr. Kim what he liked. He told me. And you just remembered all of it?" "From one conversation." Amara looked at her directly for the first time. "That's the job," she said simply. Sori held her gaze for 1 second longer than the conversation required. Then she smiled again and went to find her brother. Later, while Amara cleared the dining table, she was aware of Sori watching her from the far end of the room. She did not look up. She could feel the specific quality of that attention. Not hostile, not warm. Analytical. The attention of a woman running a very quiet calculation. Amara stacked the last of the dishes and went back to the kitchen and stood at the sink with both hands flat on the counter and told herself she had time. She had handled worse. She would handle this. What she could not have known was that Sori had already made a phone call on her way to the elevator. A man named Investigator Moon had answered on the second ring. Sori had said 4 words, "Start with her credentials." The call from Chitty came 9 days later. Amara took it in the stairwell 2 floors below the apartment, standing between the emergency exit door and the fire hose cabinet, because it was the one space in the building she was confident had no cameras. "He's out," Chitty said. He did not say hello. There was no version of this call that had time for hello. Emekadara, the man she had testified against. The Lagos financier whose money laundering network had included, 5 years ago, a Seoul-based shell company with connections to a family whose name Amara had learned only after she was already in too deep to walk away from the knowledge. He had been convicted on 11 counts. He had been sentenced to 12 years. He had served 4 years and 8 months before a legal team that cost more than most countries' annual defense budgets found a procedural error in the original indictment and leveraged it into early release. "How long do I have?" Amara asked. "He doesn't have your current location, but he has people who are looking. Weeks, maybe. Maybe less if there's already someone in Seoul feeding information back." The emergency stairwell was very quiet. Amara looked at the fire hose cabinet and thought about Taeyong sitting on that kitchen stool, telling her the smell was familiar, that he knew it but couldn't name it, and she thought about the fact that she had less time than she had planned for and more to lose than she had allowed herself to calculate. "I'm not leaving," she said. Chitty was quiet for a moment. "Amara, I'm not leaving, Chitty. Find me anything you can on Dara's current movements and send it through the secure channel. I'll be in touch." She ended the call. She stood in the stairwell for 60 seconds. Then she went back upstairs and started Taeyong's breakfast. 3 weeks passed. The pressure built in small, precise increments. Sori called Jawan on a Wednesday afternoon. Amara was in the kitchen and the door to Jawan's study was half open and she was not trying to hear the call and heard enough of it anyway. "I'm telling you the training records don't fully verify," Sori said. Her voice was the same pleasant register it always was. "I'm not saying anything definitive. I'm saying you have someone in your home with your son every day and the background has a gap." A pause. Jawan's response was too low to make out. "Jawan, I am not suggesting anything except due diligence. You're the one who would feel responsible if..." Another pause. Longer this time. "Fine," Sori said. "But think about it." The study door closed. Amara continued chopping vegetables with the steady, rhythmic focus of someone who is not thinking about anything except the size of the pieces. That evening, after Taeyong was in bed, Jawan came into the kitchen. Amara was finishing the morning's prep. He sat at the counter and looked at her for a moment, and then said, "How much of that call did you hear?" She looked up. "Enough. And if you want to run additional background checks, I won't stop you." She set down her knife. "But I'd appreciate knowing rather than having it happen behind me." He looked at her steadily. What would additional checks find? The question sat between them. The kitchen was very quiet. "Depends on how deep you go," she said. He said nothing for a long moment. She held his gaze. This was the moment that would determine a great deal. She could see it, could feel the weight of it, the specific gravity of a man deciding how much he trusted his own instinct over his sister's concern. "Go home," he said finally. "I'll see you tomorrow." She picked up her bag. She walked to the front door. Behind her, he said, "Ms. Ease." She stopped. "My sister is careful about who is in this house. So am I." A pause. "But there's a difference between careful and paranoid, and I'm still deciding which one this is." She did not turn around. "Let me know when you decide," she said and left. The moment that changed everything happened on a Saturday morning. It arrived, as the most important moments tend to, without announcing itself. Taeyong was in the kitchen watching Amara make his breakfast. This was now a routine. He appeared on her kitchen stool at 8:30 on weekend mornings with the regularity of a small appointment. She had come to structure her entire morning around. He watched. He asked precise questions about technique. He occasionally offered opinions on ingredient combinations that were surprisingly sophisticated for a 5-year-old, and that she was careful never to dismiss. This morning he was quieter than usual. He watched her work for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "Can I ask you something?" "You can always ask me something," she said. "Did you know me before?" Her hand did not stop moving on the pan. She had trained for 5 years for moments like this. Her hand did not stop. "What do you mean, my love?" "I mean before now. Before you came to cook here. Did you know me somewhere else before?" She turned off the burner. She turned around. She looked at her son, at his 5-year-old face that was asking a question with the full seriousness of someone who had been thinking about it for weeks and was only now finding the courage to voice it. "Why are you asking that?" she said carefully. "Because of the way you look at me sometimes." He was very direct. He had always been direct, apparently. She was still learning the full shape of who he was, and every new piece of it landed in her chest like a gift she had no idea how to hold. "When you think I'm not looking, you look at me like you're remembering something. And I want to know what." She sat down on the stool across from him. She looked at her son. The full, impossible weight of this moment. 5 years of surviving, 3 years of watching from a distance, 9 months of being in the same apartment and not being allowed to show a single thing, pressed down on her all at once, and she absorbed it the way she had learned to absorb everything from the feet upward, holding in the body instead of letting it reach the face. "I think," she said slowly, "that some people just feel familiar in a way that doesn't have an easy explanation. Like the world put you in the right room and something in you already knew it before your brain caught up." Taeyong considered this with the seriousness of a small philosopher. "Okay," he said, "but I think it's more than that. I think you know exactly what I mean, and you're not telling me yet." The yet sat in the air between them. Not accusatory, just accurate. "You are," Amara said, "a very perceptive person." "I know," he said, simply, and reached for his fork. The evening Sori told Jawan about Investigator Moon's findings. Amara was not in the building. She was 2 streets away in a small cafe, across a table from Chitty, listening to him tell her that Dar's people had narrowed the search to Seoul and that she had less time than weeks now. Days, possibly. A week at most before someone with the right access and the wrong motivation connected Dammy Ease to Amara Osei. "You have to tell him," Chitty said. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and looked at her with the expression of a man who had been asking her to do this for 3 months. "Amara, you have to tell Kim Jawan the truth before someone else does it for you, and it comes out wrong. If I tell him, he might remove me from the apartment. If you don't tell him and Sori figures it out first, you lose everything. The boy, the access, all of it. At least if you tell him yourself, you control the shape of the conversation. Amara looked at her coffee. He's going to be angry. Yes. He built his entire understanding of the last 5 years around a specific version of events. Telling him the truth means dismantling that. Yes, Chitty said again. And his sister. His sister is the reason you've been running for 5 years, Chitty said, with a steadiness that meant he had been holding this back for a while. Whatever loyalty you're calculating for her, stop. She walked into a clinic and took a 4-day-old baby from his mother's room, while the mother was under sedation, and she has been sleeping fine ever since. That is not someone whose feelings are a part of your calculation. Amara looked at him. Tell Kim Jawan the truth, Chitty said. Tonight if you can. She could not do it that night. Taeyong had a fever, sudden, high, the kind that required full attention and left no room for anything else. She managed it alone through the evening because Jawan was in a meeting and she would not call him for something she could handle, and she needed something she could handle right now. Needed the specific focus of caring for a sick child to make everything else stop being so large and so close. By the time Jawan got home at 9:15, Taeyong's temperature had come down and his breathing was deep, and even Amara was in the kitchen cleaning up with the focused quietness of someone running on adrenaline and discipline in roughly equal parts. Jawan stood in the doorway. He looked at the kitchen, the covered dish on the counter with a note about reheating, the children's temperature chart she had made, the small bowl of cut fruit set aside in the fridge for when Taeyong woke hungry in the night the way he sometimes did after a fever. He looked at all of this and then he looked at her. You didn't call me, he said. I had it. He's my son. I know. And I had it. If it had escalated, I would have called. She turned. He's fine. Temperature is down. He'll sleep through. Jawan looked at her for a long moment. Then, thank you. It was the same 2 words he had said to her once before, early on, when she had stayed late for no reason except that the kitchen needed finishing. But it landed differently this time. It had weight in it that the earlier version had not had, the specific weight of a man who had arrived home to find that someone had taken care of what he cared most about in the world, and that the taking care of it had been done not from obligation, but from something that looked much more like love. Go and eat, she said. The dish on the counter is yours. She picked up her bag and her coat. Ms. Ease, he said. She paused. Sit with me. He said it simply, not a command, not quite a request. Something in between, the kind of thing that only comes out of someone's mouth when they have stopped calculating the sentence before saying it. While I eat, if you're not in a rush. She looked at him across the kitchen. She sat. They talked for an hour. The longest unstructured conversation they had ever had. No agenda, no professional frame around it. Just 2 people at a kitchen counter with soul lit up beyond the windows and a sick child asleep down the hallway. He asked about her family. She told him what she could, the parts that were true and the parts that belonged to Dammy Ease, and the parts that were both at once. He told her about Taeyong's first year, which had been terrifying in the way that first years with infants apparently always were. And something moved across his face when he talked about it that was entirely unguarded and that she had not seen before. She thought about Chitty across the cafe table, telling her to tell the truth. She was not ready. Not tonight. Tonight she needed this. This ordinary hour, this table, this man eating food she had made while she sat across from him, and they talked about nothing that mattered and everything that did. One more day, she thought. One more ordinary day. She went home. She lay awake until 3 in the morning. Then she slept. In the morning, Jawan called his sister back. Amara was in the kitchen when she heard his voice from the study. Calm, even the voice he used for everything. She could not make out the words, but she heard the cadence of it change near the end of the call, a slight tightening, the adjustment of a man who has just been told something that has altered the shape of what he thought he knew. The study door opened. He came into the kitchen and stood across the counter from her and looked at her with the look she had come to know best on him. Not the cold professional look and not the unguarded evening look, but the one in between, the one that was trying to decide something and had not finished deciding. He slid a piece of paper across the counter. She looked at it. The Cape Coast Institute. A notation from Sori's investigator. Records unverifiable. 3 other names cross-referenced and confirmed. Dammy, he's not among them. Explain this, he said. She looked at the paper. She did not pick it up. There was a fire at the records office in 2019. A lot of student files from that period were. I know about the fire, he said. I checked. 12 students from that period are unverifiable. I had my team run all 12 against the agency database. He paused. You're not in it. Not under this name or any variation of it that the agency has on file. The kitchen was completely quiet. Who are you, he said. And there it was. The question she had been running from and running toward for 5 years, depending on the day. She looked at him. She thought about Taeyong on the kitchen stool, telling her he thought it was more than familiar. She thought about Chitty's face across the cafe table. She thought about a woman in a gray coat moving through a private clinic in Incheon with the quiet authority of someone collecting what was already hers. Before I answer that, she said, I need you to know that everything I have done in this kitchen, every morning with Taeyong, has been real. That was never a lie. I need you to hold on to that for the next few minutes, because what I'm about to tell you is going to make you want to discount everything you've seen in this apartment for the last 9 months, and I'm asking you not to. Jawan said nothing. He was very still. I'm in witness protection, she said. My real name is Amara Osei. I am Nigerian. I came to Seoul 5 years ago as part of a financial crimes investigation, and I had to leave in a way I didn't choose and couldn't stop. She looked at him directly. Taeyong is my son. The kitchen went so quiet that she could hear the river moving 28 floors below. Jawan did not move. Not a muscle. Not a breath, as far as she could tell. He looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him before, not any version of the face she had cataloged across 9 months of proximity. Not cold, not warm, not professional, not private. Something entirely unprocessed. The look of a man whose entire architecture of the last 5 years has just shifted on its foundation, and he is standing in the middle of it trying to determine which walls are still load-bearing. That's not possible, he said finally. His voice was very even. His mother died. In the clinic. I have documentation. You have documentation your sister gave you, Amara said. The silence that followed was different from the one before it. This one had a sound in it, a low subsonic pressure that was not quite a sound, the specific frequency of a realization moving through a person who has spent years building their understanding of their own life on a piece of ground that has just been revealed to be hollow. What did you say, he said. It was not a question. She told him everything. She told him about Imikadara and the money laundering network and the moment she had found the sole connection buried in the financial records. A shell company, ghost transactions, a name she had not recognized until she did, until she understood whose family it belonged to and what that meant. She told him about the investigators in Lagos and the week of being followed after she came forward and arriving in Incheon 8 months pregnant, because it was the only place she had access to, the only safe place she could find. A private clinic where a midwife named Mrs. O had delivered Taeyong in the early hours of a Tuesday morning in November while Chitty sat in the corridor and held the entire weight of the situation in his hands. She told him she had held her son for 4 days, that he had her grandmother's nose and his father's eyes, and that he had gripped her finger on the first night with a strength that was completely unreasonable for a human being that size. She told him about the afternoon of day 4 when a woman in a gray coat arrived. She described Sori, without naming her yet, described the way she had sat across from Amara in that clinic room with a specific composure that Amara had later come to understand was the composure of someone who has already decided the outcome and is simply present for the administration of it. She told him what Sori had said, that Dara's people knew Amara had delivered, that they would find her within days, that the only way to keep the child safe was to remove him from the situation, that she would ensure the baby was raised in safety, in Seoul, with every resource he would ever need. She told me I had 24 hours to decide, Amara said, And she was not wrong that he was safer without me. At that point, I was a target with no protection and no documentation, and no one except Chitty who knew I was alive. She was not wrong about the danger. She paused. She was wrong about the method. She was wrong about taking him without my consent while I was under sedation. She was wrong about every single thing she did after that conversation. But the calculation about Taeyong's safety, she wasn't wrong. Jawan had turned to face the window. His back was to her. She could see the tension across his shoulders, the only place it showed on him, the single tell in a body that had learned to manage everything else. She kept going. She told him about rebuilding, about the witness protection program, the new documentation, the years of constructing DAMI-E's, the training she had actually completed, the work history she had actually accumulated, the credentials that were real even if the name above them wasn't. She told him about coming back to Seoul 3 years after leaving, about watching Taeyong's life from a distance, the school, the park on Saturdays, the specific ice cream stall near the Itaewon entrance he visited with his father every second weekend, about finding the agency, about walking into the interview for this position and sitting across from Jaewon Kim and understanding within the first 4 minutes that she needed to be very careful, not because he was dangerous, but because he was not. I needed to know if you were part of what she did, she said. I couldn't come to you with the truth until I was certain you hadn't known. I couldn't afford to be wrong. Not with him. She paused. 9 months. I watch you with him every morning, every evening. The way you talk to him like he's a real person instead of small inconvenience. The way you know which socks he prefers, in which direction he needs his blanket folded, and the name of every teacher in his class, and exactly which friends are kind to him and which ones are not. Her voice stayed steady. She had earned this steadiness. It had cost a great deal. You didn't know. I was certain within 3 months, and I stayed for the rest of it because I couldn't figure out how to leave. Jawan stood at the window for a long time. When he turned around, his face was the most stripped thing she had ever seen on a human being. Every layer of management gone, every professional construction, every controlled public expression, every carefully maintained distance. What was underneath all of it, after 9 years of grief and 5 years of raising a child alone and a lifetime of being the person who kept everything running, was a man who had been lied to by the person he trusted most in the world, who was standing in his own kitchen looking at a woman who had been in his apartment for 9 months and was the answer to a question he had stopped allowing himself to ask. She told me you were dead, he said. His voice was completely level. It was the most precise and controlled thing she had ever heard. More controlled than anger, more controlled than grief. The specific quality of a man who is holding something enormous at arm's length, because he knows that if he lets it reach him while he's still standing in this kitchen, he will not be able to remain standing. She stood in front of me and told me you were dead, and she watched me grieve you. I know, Amara said. I grieved you for years. I know. I grieved you, and I raised our son, and I told him his mother was gone, and I believed it. He looked at her, because she told me, and I believed her. The kitchen was very still. Down the hall, Taeyong's door was slightly open, and through it came the small, ordinary sounds of a child still asleep, a deep and even breathing, completely unaware that the shape of his whole life was being restructured in the next room. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Jaewon said. When you came back, when you found him, why did you wait? Because I didn't know if you knew, she said, and I could not afford to be wrong. He held her gaze. He breathed. He looked at her face, really looked, the way she had caught him almost looking across 9 months and then stopping himself, rationing the full attention as though he didn't trust what it would show him. Go and be with Taeyong, he said. When he wakes up, be with him. He want to get his car keys. He drove to Gangnam without calling ahead. Sori opened the door and read his face and stepped back without speaking. He sat across from her in her living room and placed nothing on the table between them. No folder, no documents, just himself and what he now knew. Tell me, he said, what you told yourself that made it reasonable. Sori sat with her hands folded in her lap. She looked at him with the composure she had maintained through every difficult conversation of her life, the composure that their mother had taught her, and that she had spent 30 years perfecting. "I protected this family," she said. "I protected Taeyong. She was a liability. She was being hunted by people with the kind of reach that—" "Stop," he said. She stopped. "You went to a clinic," he said, "where a woman had just delivered a baby and was recovering from surgery, and you waited until she was under sedation, and you took the child. You put him in a car, and you drove to an airport, and you put him on a plane, and you brought him to me, and you told me his mother was dead." He looked at his sister. "And then you watched me raise that child for 5 years, knowing that his mother was alive somewhere and had woken up in a clinic in Incheon and found him gone." Sori's composure held. It had always been the one thing nothing could break. "Everything I did—" "Do not," he said. "Tell me it was for the family." She was quiet. "Taeyong reached for her hand on the first day," he said. His voice was still very even. The evenness was not calm. It was something under enormous pressure that had found a form. "The first day she was in this apartment. I watched it happen. A 5-year-old child reached for a stranger's hand and held on, and I thought it was because he was a child who reached for people. But he has never done that before. Not once. Not with anyone." He looked at his sister. "You know what that means. And you have been watching it happen for 9 months. Jawan, she spent 5 years in witness protection," he said. "She spent 3 years watching his life from a distance because she couldn't get close enough. She spent 9 months in my kitchen pretending to be someone else because it was the only way to see her own son. She sat at a table with him every morning and made his breakfast and cut his eggs in quarters instead of halves and didn't once allow herself to show a single thing on her face that you could have used." He stood up. "And you commissioned an investigator to take that away from her." "I was protecting." "You were protecting a secret," he said. "That is not the same thing." He told her what was going to happen. Investigator Moon was to be dismissed and all findings destroyed before the end of the day. Sori was to have no contact with Taeyong until Jaewon decided, with Amara, how and when to tell the child the truth. If Sori made a single move that surfaced Amara's real identity to Dara's network or to anyone else, the financial records from 5 years ago, the ones that connected the family to the shell company that connected the family to Emeka Dara's network, were going to the prosecutor's office in Lagos and the prosecutor's office in Seoul on the same morning. Sori went very still. "You would destroy everything we've built. You destroyed it 5 years ago in a clinic in Incheon," he said. "I'm deciding what to build from what's left." He looked at his sister one final time. She was still composed. The composure had never broken. He understood now that it never would, that it was not a mask over something more honest, but the actual substance of her, built over decades, dense all the way through. He was not looking for remorse. He had stopped expecting that in the car on the way over. "Taeyong will know the full truth when he's old enough to decide for himself whether he wants a relationship with you," he said. "I won't influence that decision, but he'll make it knowing everything." He left. He drove back across the river. In the front seat, Tae, his driver and head of security who had worked for him for 11 years, said nothing, which was exactly correct. He got home at 2 in the afternoon. Taeyong was on the kitchen floor with a set of building blocks and Amara was on the floor beside him. And they were constructing something tall and structurally precarious, and Taeyong was explaining with great authority why the blue ones needed to go at the bottom specifically. When Jaewon came in, Taeyong looked up. "Appa," he said, "we're making a bridge. Dammy says the foundation is wrong, but I think the foundation is fine." "The foundation is wrong," Amara said serenely. "It is holding up fine," Taeyong said. As if on cue, the structure tilted. Taeyong regarded it. "Temporarily," he said. Jaewon sat on the floor. He picked up a block. Taeyong showed him where it was needed. The three of them rebuilt the bridge for 20 minutes, and Taeyong narrated the entire process with the running commentary of a construction foreman who is confident he is surrounded by talented but inexperienced workers, and the bridge held when they finished it, and Taeyong sat back and looked at it with the satisfaction of someone who has never doubted the outcome. "I knew it," he said. "You were wrong about the foundation," Amara said. "I was right about the bridge," Taeyong said. Jaewon looked at the two of them, his son and her. and the specific comfortable ease between them. The ease of people who had been finding each other in a room for 9 months without the language to name what they were finding. He thought, she has been here the whole time. He thought, I have been falling in love with someone I was also grieving, and I could not understand why it felt like both at once, and now I understand why. Before you find out what happens next, if this story has you, if you felt something when Taeyong looked at her on that kitchen stool and said he thought it was more than familiar, please take a second and subscribe to this channel. Like this video, and drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from, because this community of ours is one of my favorite things in the world, and I want to know you're here. Now, back to the story. That evening after Taeyong was in bed, Amara and Jawan sat at the kitchen counter with the city spread out below the windows and the apartment quiet around them. She had made tea. They held their cups. The silence between them was the specific silence of two people who have said everything enormous and are now living in the space after it. The strange and unfamiliar territory of nothing left to hide. What happens to Dara? Jawan asked. He's out of prison. He's looking for me. She said it plainly, the way she said everything now, the performance of Dammy ease set down. Chitty thinks I have days before his people narrow it to this city. Jawan was quiet for a moment. Give me everything you have on him. His current legal team, his known associates, his financial structure. All of it. She looked at him. I own companies in 5 countries, he said. I have legal teams that have taken down harder targets than a man fresh out of prison with a grudge. He looked at her over his cup. You've been doing this alone for 5 years. You don't have to do it alone from here. Something moved in Amara's chest that she had been making herself not feel for 9 months, that she had been keeping carefully on the other side of a line she had drawn because the line was necessary, and the line had been the only thing keeping her functional. She looked at her tea. She looked at him. I need to tell you something else, she said. He waited. The first month I was here, when you were difficult. She looked at her cup. The temperature note. The plating corrections. Sending me home at 7. I thought you were just the kind of man who needed to control every variable in his environment. She paused. But then you put that glass of water on the counter without saying anything, and I thought, he does things without explanation when he wants to, and he's doing this because he wanted to, not because it was required. And I started watching you differently after that. Jawan looked at her. How differently? Like someone I was in danger of, she said simply. He was quiet for a moment. Then, the first week, when you pushed back on the hours. I went to my study and I sat there for 10 minutes before I could read a single document. He looked at his cup. I kept thinking about the way you said what reason. Like the schedule was something that needed to justify itself to you instead of the other way around. I couldn't decide if it was the most irritating thing I'd experienced in a professional context, or, she said. He looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved by the smallest control degree, or to the most interesting. She looked at him. He looked at her. I've been here 9 months, she said. I know. And you've been, she stopped. I know, he said. Outside, Seoul moved at its permanent frequency. Towers lit against the dark. The river visible in the distance. He reached across the counter and placed his hand over hers, warm, deliberate, and she looked down at it. Then she turned her hand over and held it. They sat like that in the kitchen with everything that had survived to get them here, and neither of them spoke, and the silence was entirely different from the silences that had come before it. 3 weeks later, on a Sunday morning with pale winter light coming through the penthouse windows, they sat with Taeyong at the low kitchen table. Just the 3 of them. Taeyong had been told there was something they wanted to talk about. He arrived at the table with his cup of warm barley tea and the specific settled posture of a child who has been expecting an important conversation and is prepared for it. Jawan spoke first. He was good with words when they mattered. Amara had learned, and they mattered now. He told Taeyong that when he was very small, something complicated had happened. That his mother had needed to go away to keep him safe, not because she wanted to, but because it was the only way to protect him from something dangerous. That she had spent years finding a way back. Taeyong listened. He held his cup with both hands the way he always did and looked between the two of them and said nothing until Jawan finished. Then he looked at Amara for a long time. I knew it was something like that, he said. Amara's voice came from somewhere steadier than she felt. What do you mean? I mean, I knew since the first day. He set his cup down. You know how I said it smelled like something I knew? I remember. I think it's because you were there at the beginning. And smells from the beginning stay. He looked at her with Jawan's eyes and her grandmother's nose and his own completely specific and irreplaceable self. I think I always knew. I just didn't have the word. What's the word now? She asked. Her voice was steady. She was making it steady from the absolute bottom of everything she had. He thought about it. He was thorough, like his father, considered things from every angle before committing. Then he looked at her. Mama, he said. She reached across the table and held his face in both hands and looked at him. Really looked, the way she had not been permitted to look for 5 years. The full and open look of a mother who is seeing her child, actually seeing him for the first time since he was 4 days old and new to the world, and gripping her finger with completely unreasonable strength. He let her look. He sat very still and let her take in every detail of his face, and he looked back at her with a calm certainty that she thought was the bravest thing she had ever seen. Jawan sat across from them and watched, and his face did something that had no name and needed none. The months that followed changed the shape of everything in ways that were small and specific and completely impossible to miss if you were paying attention. Jawan started saying her real name. Not Dammy, Amara. He said it the first time 3 days after the kitchen conversation, in the middle of a sentence about a completely ordinary subject, and she stopped what she was doing and looked at him, and he looked back at her with absolute calm, as though he had been saying it forever, as though the other name had been the temporary one all along. Taeyong started calling her Mama in the mornings and Dammy at other times, with the fluid ease of a child who understood that names were sometimes about context and sometimes about the specific warmth of what you meant by them, and he chose accordingly. He was 5 years old, and he had already decided he was going to be fine, and Amara thought that was the most extraordinary thing she had ever witnessed. The Dara problem resolved itself on a Tuesday. Jawan's legal team in Lagos, working in coordination with the original investigators who had built the prosecution, found 3 procedural vulnerabilities in the early release ruling and moved on all 3 simultaneously. Emeka Dara's lawyers, faced with the prospect of a reincarceration hearing that had been constructed by people who had considerably more resources and considerably more motivation than the original prosecution, quietly entered into a negotiation. By Friday, Dara had signed a binding agreement that included conditions so specific and so monitored that any violation would result in immediate full reincarceration without a hearing. Chitty called Amara when it was done. She was in the kitchen making Taeyong's after-school snack. It's over, he said. She stood at the counter with the phone against her ear and looked at the Han River in the distance through the kitchen window and felt something leave her body that she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten it was a weight rather than a condition. Thank you, she said. For everything, Chitty. For all of it. Go live, he said gruffly and hung up. She set the phone down. Taeyong came through the door 20 minutes later at his usual time, dropped his bag in its usual place, and appeared in the kitchen doorway. What for snack? He asked. Plantain, she said. Yes, he said, with great feeling, and climbed onto his stool. Jawan proposed on a Thursday evening in February. Taeyong was in bed. The apartment was quiet and warm, and outside the city was moving through its night routines, the river visible in the distance, the towers across the water lit in patterns that Amara had memorized without meaning to across a year of looking at them from his kitchen. He came and sat across from her at the low table, and he looked at her and placed a small box between them. She looked at the box. She looked at him. I had a ring made once before, he said. A long time ago. I never gave it. He looked at her directly, the direct look he had used from the very first interview. the one she had learned to read as his version of honesty rather than hostility. I had this one made 6 weeks ago. I was going to wait longer. I decided I've been waiting long enough. She opened the box. I'm not going to tell you that none of it mattered, he said. The 9 years, the distance, all of it. It mattered. It cost something from both of us that doesn't come back. But I would choose every piece of it again if it was the path to here. I would choose you again with the full knowledge of what it cost. I would choose you in the clinic in Incheon and in the first interview in this kitchen and in every morning since. He paused. I'm choosing you now. She looked at the ring for a long moment. Then she looked at him. Yes, she said. Jawan. Obviously, yes. He took the ring from the box and put it on her hand, and she looked down at it on her finger, and the river was visible through the windows, and the kitchen was warm, and from down the hallway came the small sound of a door opening. Footsteps. Taeyong appeared in the kitchen doorway in his pajamas, half asleep, hair pressed flat on one side. He looked at the two of them at the low table. He looked at the ring. He looked at Jawan. He looked at Amara. Are you getting married? He said. Yes, Jawan said. Taeyong considered this. He looked at the ring once more. Then he looked at Amara. Good, he said, with complete and simple certainty. I told him in June at school that was going to happen. You told your friend? Amara started. Weeks ago, Taeyong said, and turned around and went back down the hallway to bed. The kitchen was quiet for a second. Then Amara pressed her lips together, and Jawan looked at the ceiling, and they both held it exactly 1 second before they stopped holding it. Her laugh came out first, real and full. The laugh of a woman who has survived a great deal and has arrived somewhere she did not dare believe in for a long time. His was quieter, contained as everything about him was contained, but entirely present, entirely honest. The laugh of a man who has understood for the first time in years that things can be both very serious and very funny at the same time, and that this is not a contradiction. He reached across and pulled her close. She leaned into him. The laughter settled into something quieter and warmer, and they sat like that on the floor of the kitchen with Seoul lit up outside, and a 5-year-old asleep down the hall who had apparently known weeks ago. And all of it, every year of surviving, every document constructed in the dark, every morning of managing her own face, every single piece of the long and difficult road back, felt for the first time like it had been worth exactly what it cost. She had come to this city for her son. She had found her way back to herself. She had found, in the process, a man who had chosen her then and chosen her now with the full and honest weight of what choosing meant. And she had found, in the daily, ordinary shape of mornings in this kitchen and evenings at this table, and a small voice from down the hall insisting his structural decisions were correct, a life that was not surviving, a life that was just living. This was where the running ended. This was where she stopped, not because it was safe, because it was home. If this story moved something in you, if you felt it when Taeyong said mama for the first time, or when Amara stood in that stairwell and said, I'm not leaving, or when Jawan told his sister you destroyed this 5 years ago in a clinic in Incheon, please like this video. Share it with someone who needs a story that earns every single moment it delivers. Subscribe if you haven't already, because there are more original stories coming to this channel, and you do not want to miss what comes next. Drop a comment and tell me, was Sori's punishment enough? She didn't go to prison. She lost access. She lost power. She lost her place in the inner circle she spent her whole life protecting. But she is still free. Does that sit right with you? Or did Jawan let her off too easily? And which moment hit you the hardest? Tell me. I read every single one. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next story.